Reception and Placement Orientation Curriculum. The webinar would be co-presented by me and my colleague Danny Abrams, who is a staff member who actually designed and developed the curriculum. And the structure of the webinar for today will be for me to offer a brief introduction, followed by a presentation by Danny, and then a question and answer period for which we hope will leave about half an hour. Before we get started, I would like to invite our PRM Program Officer, Barbara Day, the Domestic Section Chief at PRM Office of Admissions, to say a few words of welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't tell you how happy we are at PRM to be offering you this curriculum and how grateful we are to Cal for having produced a tool that we think will be really helpful for so many different programs in different settings throughout the U.S. I'm so happy to welcome all you to this webinar and hope that you do have some questions for us at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So before we launch into really the meat of our presentation and discussion today of making your way, I just want to say a few other words about the webinar, and that is there will be some questions that Danny will be posing to the audience in the course of the webinar that we will ask you to respond to in the chat box, and Danny will mention that when the time comes for those in her presentation. And then also there will be a survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you can take the time to respond to in order to give us some feedback on the webinar today and on additional types of resources and information that would be helpful to you as you do your work. So as a brief introduction, I want to mention that all of this, including some of the information I will share in a minute about the cultural orientation objectives and indicators, is grounded in the idea that cultural orientation and community orientation, when delivered in the U.S., is a continuum that starts with overseas orientation and then continues with reception and placement orientation and beyond. And my apologies, we're having technical difficulties with the slides. We have to restart the computer, so you should be able to see the slides in just a minute as we reload the PowerPoint. To start, even before you can see the slides, and you will be able to in just a minute, the Cultural Orientation Working Group, working with PRM and the Center for Applied Linguistics, started a few years ago to work on the Cultural Orientation Objectives and Indicators project. And we started with the goal of taking a look at orientation throughout the orientation continuum and asking the fundamental question of what refugees need to know to successfully resettle. Apologies, let me take just a minute to pull up the PowerPoint again and see if you can see it. Okay, it should be working now, and I will go for just a second to the previous slide that I was planning to put up when I talked about the CO continuum to kind of show the planting of the seed of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that our colleagues in overseas culture orientation work on, and then the passing of all of this through the different stages as refugees move through their initial and ongoing steps of resettlement in the U.S. To go back to the objectives and indicators, so as I mentioned, the key question we started with on this project was what do refugees need to know to successfully resettle in terms of knowledge, skills, and attitudes before resettlement, and this applied to the overseas programs and the development of overseas CO objectives and indicators, and then during the reception and placement period. As a result of that process and extensive consultations and conversations that happened on the CO work group, in refugee focus groups, and with service providers around the country, we ended up with two documents that are really the foundation of CO delivery, both overseas and domestically. One is the Overseas CO Objectives and Indicators document. If you have not seen that, that can be found on our website. And the other document is Domestic CO, and that is Reception and Placement Objectives and Indicators document. So the purpose in the development of these documents was to establish some clarity regarding key messages of orientation from overseas orientation to domestic orientation, and then to, as a very important purpose as well, facilitate continuum between overseas and domestic orientation. And that means that now we have a way for domestic providers to look at overseas CO objectives and indicators and have a pretty good idea of what exactly is being covered by all of the overseas CO programs as they deliver their orientation classes at the RC level. And then also for our overseas colleagues to look at domestic R&P objectives and indicators and to know what comes next for refugees who are departing and starting to resettle in communities around the country. And then a third really important goal is to guide development of resources. And one of those resources is the resource that we'll be focusing on today, and that is the R&P Orientation Curriculum, but also objectives and indicators were translated into other resources and aligned with other resources such as the Welcome to the United States book, the new edition of the book that hopefully many of you have already seen and received from your headquarters, and refugees are starting to receive at various RSCs. And then another piece of it all that we are working on right now, and I will say a few more words about that in closing the webinar, and that is the CO assessment toolkit, as well as development of staff training resources and training of trainers resources, which Cal will be focusing on more in calendar year 2014. So people often ask, how are we to use these objectives and indicators document? So the full document planning all of the objectives and indicators for R&P orientation in particular reflects the key knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be conveyed to refugees during orientation overseas for the overseas document, and then during the reception and placement period for the R&P objectives and indicators document. And then they have been used, as I mentioned, in the development of resources. And one thing that I want to remind us all of is that this document, and it is quite extensive, reflects what should be taught, what needs to be conveyed to refugees, and not what should or can be assessed. So once we roll out the assessment document, you will see that it does not have 100 questions detailing all of the and hitting all of each objective and indicator, but it kind of rolls it up to some key components of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are critical to refugees in the early stages of settlement. So right now I will turn it over to my colleague Danny Abrams, who will speak more specifically about the curriculum.
Great, thank you, Sonia. I'm thinking it looks like everybody is able to hear me. I'm Danny Abrams, the Training and Curriculum Development Specialist at the Cultural Orientation Resource Center and author of the Making Your Way curriculum. Before I go on, I wanted to ask you all to take a moment to think about one or two key things you hope to learn during this webinar. You can write your responses into the question box. This is part of our exercise and then also part of our effort to familiarize you all with what is available on this webinar program. So take a minute to do that, and we will take a look at these as the webinar goes on and address some of these during hopefully most of them during the webinar, and then some at the end during the question period. Okay, so Making Your Way was developed to provide additional support to resettlement agencies in delivering the objectives and indicators to refugees in an effective manner. Whoops, okay, sorry about that. Computer issues. Okay, this included significant input and feedback from the CO Workgroup, national resettlement agencies, and on-the-ground staff. The full curriculum is made up of a user's guide, 13 units, and 49 activity plans, which are aligned with the R&P orientation objectives and indicators. There is a lot of information included that should be useful to your orientation programs. I have been asked to talk to you about using the manual with ease and to help you tailor it to the needs of your clients in your cultural orientation program. Before I get started, I have a couple things to bring your attention to. First, let's see if I can, I'm so sorry. Okay. Raise your hand if you've been able to familiarize yourself with the curriculum prior to this webinar. So again, I'll give you a second to find that function. Okay, great. Next, I wanted to explore a few important terms that I will use throughout this webinar and that are used and explained in the curriculum. These terms are orientation, trainer, and participant. When I refer to orientation, I am considering both cultural orientation and community orientation. Cultural orientation often refers to orientation that refugees receive overseas, while community orientation generally refers to the efforts provided in the United States. However, both refer to the R&P period of orientation, and so I will use the term orientation as such. In addition, the terms training and orientation are often used interchangeably. Orientation differs from training, however. Training focuses more on one-way transmission of information and skills from a trainer to a participant. I'm so sorry about this message. I don't know why it keeps popping up here. While orientation, as opposed to training, provides a deeper understanding of the materials and helps participants consider attitudes in addition to developing knowledge and skills. Some of you or your colleagues may consider your work to be training. If attitudes are addressed, then I'm including that work in my discussion of orientation. Orientation is often called CO, cultural orientation, community orientation, the creation of CO, and I'll refer to both orientation and CO during this webinar as sort of the same thing. The next term I want to address is trainer. This refers to most refugee service providers. Some staff may not view themselves as trainers. I use this term to emphasize the educational significance of your work and use the term trainer to talk about anyone delivering orientation to refugees. This often includes caseworkers or managers as well as others. The last term I want to address is participant. This refers to a participant receiving orientation. You may more commonly refer to him or her as a refugee or client, but for the purpose of this webinar and also the Making Your Way curriculum, I'm using the term participant. To get started with the discussion of the curriculum, I'll start with the user's guide. As you can see, there's a lot of detail for trainers in the user's guide. This here is the first page of the table of contents. So the user guide includes an introduction, which provides the background and development of the curriculum, a little bit of what Sonia discussed, as well as the purpose of the curriculum and the intended audience, resettlement agency staff delivering R&P orientation. That's you. An overview of the curriculum is offered, providing detail about using the resource and design and organization of the units. It talks about reoccurring themes, which include the goal of self-sufficiency, cultural adjustment, and how it is an ongoing process, establishing realistic expectations, and the overarching importance of learning English. The overview also provides information about the flexibility of the curriculum, which I'm going to discuss more in depth during this webinar. Some items I wanted to call attention to so you can read more about them in the user's guide include time. We know you all have limited time and need to utilize it efficiently. Group size. R&P orientation is provided to a variety of capacities, from one person to 2 or 3 people, to small groups, to large groups of 20 or 30, or even 40 or 50 participants, depending on the program. Previous experience of trainers. We know that trainers come from a variety of backgrounds, such as caseworkers or case managers, former refugees or teachers. It is important for trainers to familiarize themselves not only with the refugee or client, but also the information needed to deliver orientation, as well as considerations for delivery of effective orientation. And then it's also important to consider differing levels of orientation. Orientation is provided to diverse groups of participants, whether it's individually or in groups, and thus it is important to adjust the delivery of orientation sessions for the needs of participants and their previous experiences. There's a strong section on staff preparation and things for staff or trainers to know about and improve their training and orientation delivery skills. We also provide some useful resources for staff training. The fourth section of the user's guide is on tools for trainers and orientation development. This talks about instructional approaches. The first instructional approach addressed are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes in training. This was the difference between training and orientation that I addressed earlier. You can see the icons used throughout the curriculum here on the right side, knowledge, skills, and attitudes, as long as this box doesn't keep popping up on me. And these icons denote which activity plans address the different aspects of training and orientation. And the second instructional approach discussed is about working with different groups. We provide specific information about working with participants with little or no formal education, highly educated participants, older refugees, and participants with disabilities. There is substantial information and tips provided about working with groups of different sizes, from individuals to small groups to large groups. We discussed the importance of incorporating English into orientation and provides very simple techniques on how that can be easily accomplished to enhance the English capacities and abilities of your participants, while also encouraging them to attend English language classes. Of course, we all know how important English language classes are. And lastly, we address the importance of needs assessments and how to use them, as well as learning assessments. Why they are important, how they can be used best, not only as an assessment of the orientation, but also to feed into the next orientation session as a needs assessment. I'll talk a little more about needs assessments in a bit. Pardon me while I grab a quick drink of water. And then we provide a list of units and activity plans. I'd like to talk to you briefly through the layout of the units. This page here shows you the first page of the units and activity plans. So, thinking about the layout of the units, each unit starts off with a unit overview for the trainer. This was developed to make each unit more manageable. The trainer can read through this page of information to learn the key things that participants will learn as a result of the activity plans provided in the unit. The trainer can also identify what activity plans are provided, a brief description of what they cover, and then which R&P orientation objectives and indicators are addressed in each activity plan. So around the second page of each unit, there's this chart that I show here, which shows you the objective, the indicator, and then what activity plans address those objectives and indicators. And as you can see, sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's more for the unit. The first activity plan in each content-related unit, such as role of the resettlement or cultural adjustment, starts off with an activity plan called the basics. That's a capital V, capital T, capital B, the basics. This is a simple session plan for trainers to use to teach the key objectives and indicators for that topic. Activity plans following the basics then provide more detail to reinforce key indicators for refugees to learn about the rest of the objectives and indicators in CO. Each activity plan, so those were the units that we were talking about, and now each activity plan starts out with an introduction for the trainer, which provides key content and main messages to address in the activity plan. The first page of each activity plan includes not only the introduction for the trainer, but also shows you the knowledge, skills, and attitudes addressed. So you can see up on the left-hand corner here these icons. You can see that this plan in particular addresses knowledge and attitudes. You can see the suggested time for completing the activity plan. Here, that is 15 minutes. And then you can also find the list of objectives addressed, the materials needed, and 3 key English vocabulary words and 1 phrase that the trainer can introduce if there is time to assist participants in learning about key English that would be useful for the topic that's being discussed. You will also find that activity plans include a lot of pictures to help trainers address the needs of those who are not as literate, and also provide visual images of what things look like to enhance cultural orientation for all participants. I would also like to take this opportunity to note that this comprehensive curriculum is not meant to be delivered in full to all refugees. It is important to identify the needs of your participants, what they want to learn more about, and what gaps exist in their current knowledge that they will need to learn more about, and then tailor an orientation program to the needs of your participants. I will talk more about how to do this shortly. We'll now talk about the use of the activity plans. First, you will notice that I'm calling them activity plans instead of lesson plans. This is because they are activity-oriented. Using activities in an orientation session is important because the more actively engaged participants are, the more likely they are to retain the information imparted. Lecture, or maybe an information dump, is most effective when used infrequently and in short amounts of time. Lecture serves a place and a purpose, and it is very important in a number of capacities, but spacing it out and keeping it to short bits, 2, 3, 4 minutes is very important and really helps people understand the information that you're telling them and then get them actively engaged in their own learning. Some topics can be more challenging to engage participants, but this curriculum, Making Your Way, provides you with easily implemented ways to accomplish this. I'll demonstrate some of these ways during the webinar. So to make this webinar a little more learner-centered and a little less of an information dump, please raise your hand if you are sitting with one or more other people during this webinar. Find your raise your hand button. If it's just you, then don't raise your hand, and if it's more than just you, please do. You can also take a quick moment to stand and stretch, but then please come back. This is a very brief icebreaker break. All right, thank you. So R&P orientation, as you well know, is often delivered in informal settings, not just a classroom, but in a car, a waiting room, at your desk, at someone's home. I've identified where the plans I will discuss today can be used if modified only slightly for these venues. So here's the car. It could be in a waiting room. It could be at a desk. or someone's home, and I switched those up. So I think that these little icons are pretty clear here. I would like to now show you some examples of activity plans and how they can easily be adapted when working with different populations and needs. Here are the plans that I will address. You can see I'll start off with a needs assessment. That's kind of a brief thing, but since I'm talking about how important it is, I'd like to address that. I'll move into role of the local resettlement agency, the basics lesson, role of the local resettlement agency. I'll talk a little bit about housing plan, about being a good neighbor, and then employment, finding a job. So I'd like to start off this discussion about planning your CO session by utilizing a needs assessment. I talked a little about the importance of a needs assessment earlier. A needs assessment helps trainers identify what participants want to know and what participants need to know, or what gaps exist in their current knowledge of resettlement and life in the U.S. This can take place formally or informally. If you're not able to talk with participants ahead of time or plan for a formal needs assessment, or in addition to talking with participants, which is ideal, the trainer can consider the needs of previously resettled refugees from a similar country, language group, ethnicity, family makeup, and or educational background. And ideally, you would be able to conduct a needs assessment, whether formally or informally, with your direct participants, as well as getting feedback from others. And again, that can be formally or informally. When you identify this information, you're able to determine what the CO program should focus on for your participant or participants. Ideally, each program will be a little different depending on the needs of your participants. In addition, it is also ideal to conduct a needs assessment for each for each participant, whether it is, for each topic, whether it is formal or informal. So ideally, you would have a general needs assessment to identify what topics you would be talking about, and then smaller needs assessments for each topic. You'll see an example of both formal and informal, as well as topic-oriented versus the larger picture today. So my questions for you to think about, when have you seen a needs assessment before? And you can go ahead and type your responses into the question box. I'll give you a minute to do that. So when have you seen a needs assessment? Yeah, you might have seen one at a workshop. You may have seen one within your own agency. You may have seen one during an orientation session. You've also seen a needs assessment today. When I first started talking, I asked all of you to write into the question box and let us know what one or two things you really wanted to learn as a result of this webinar. That's a needs assessment. I also have asked some of you to raise your hand at various points. Another needs assessment. Making your way includes 3 activity plans for conducting a needs assessment with participants, 3 formal activity plans. Informally, most of the activity plans give you informal ways to conduct one as well. The plan you choose to use should be based on the size and interests of your group. So topical signs and pictures, that first one listed there, is best with all sizes. Movement and pictures, the second one, is best for groups, small or large. And then topic headers and interests is best for large groups. There are variations provided in session plans, the activity plans, with this information as well. In addition, how to determine which needs assessment activity plan is best for your group. There also is more information on how to vary, how to adjust the plans for the size of your group. I'll briefly run through the first activity plan, topical signs and pictures, since that's one that's really easily run for individuals, small groups, and large groups. This session and all of the needs assessment activity plans help you identify what participants know and want to know more about. I would hang each of the topical signs around the training space in English and or a language or languages participants are more familiar with. So you saw the employment and the cultural adjustment ones, pictures. I would introduce the signs to participants, and for the record, the signs in the curriculum have text underneath so that you are aware, and for those who are literate can see what they're referring to. Then I would place the topical pictures on a table or a chair under the signs. So small, they're really just small pieces of paper with the same picture. I would then ask participants to take a picture from the signs that they want to learn more about. So if you wanted to learn more about housing options and health benefits, then you would take pictures from the housing sign and the health and hygiene sign. I would then ask small groups to discuss the pictures they chose. While small groups are doing that, the trainer can see how many pictures are left as a result and identify what topics to discuss more in depth. The trainer would then bring the group together, the full group, and ask small groups to share highlights from their discussions. The trainer can then lead a discussion about participant interests, asking for more information to identify specific interests as well as gaps in knowledge. So, let's say, here we obviously have a lot of interest in employment. Well, what do you know about finding a job? Or what would you like to learn more about with regard to employment? As a trainer, I might learn that participants know a lot about transportation and cleaning a home, but not as much about the process of paying rent or the importance of working. A variation for working with an individual is to hang the pictures around the room and, as the trainer, walk around with the participant to discuss the different pictures. At each picture, ask the participant what she or he knows about the topic and what she or he wants to learn more about. A variation for working with diverse language backgrounds is to group participants by language as they walk around the training space to look at the pictures. Participants can talk in their small groups using the language they are comfortable with, and then the trainer can work with interpreters to lead the full group discussion. We'll now discuss use of the activity plan, the basics, about role of the resettlement agency. The activity for this session is quite simple. I will run through a small part of it, and instead of asking all of you to stand in a circle as directed in the plan, which is clearly not possible on this webinar, I'll ask you to use the raise your hand function. If you need a stretch, feel free to stand while we do this activity. It's a good time for it. Continue listening. Make sure you don't go far from the speakers. During the session preparation, the trainer is instructed to find out the resettlement agency's policy on protocol for refugees contacting resettlement agency staff, of course, if that person doesn't already know that. So you can picture this, everyone is standing in a circle, and then I would read the first statement. Your resettlement agency will help you access important public services such as medical assistance and English language classes. If you agree with the statement, if we were standing in the circle, I would ask you to step into the circle, take one step in. If you disagree, I would ask you to remain standing where you are. Now, since we're not standing in the circle, I will ask you to use that raise your hand function. If you agree with this statement, please raise your hand. If you disagree, then keep your hand unraised. And then we include a note for the trainer. During the edition of this, stress the participants should discuss accessing public assistance with their resettlement agency. So everyone, please remove your raised hands. The second statement is your resettlement agency is always available to help you. So you do not need to work with the agency. So you can go ahead and raise your hand if you agree with that statement, and do not raise your hand if you disagree. And then again, there's a note for trainer included here. which these notes identify important aspects for the trainer that are related to these statements to help them lead a discussion. And here the note is discussing the importance of establishing a partnership with the resettlement agency. So I hope that you all did not raise your hands. And you can go ahead and put them back down if you did. There are 3 more statements included in this activity plan, so you can see the session is fairly quick and allows the trainer to cover key information in an interactive manner that is very simple. Trainers are then instructed to tell participants how to contact agency staff using organizational protocol and then debrief the session as a group using questions provided. So for those of you who opted to stand for that little activity, please have a seat. If working with a small group of 1, 2, or 3 participants, standing in a circle is not necessary. As you've seen during this session, or during the session the way that I ran it over the webinar, it's not necessary. The trainer can have everyone seated at a table, or this could even take place in a waiting room while waiting for an appointment. The session would be similar to how I've run it today, except it would be face-to-face and thus more interactive. The trainer reads the statement, and instead of taking a step, they can raise their hand or move an object, such as a paper clip or a piece of paper, to show that they agree with the statement. This activity plan only requires the paper with the questions and can be used in someone's home, at a desk, or in a car. So you can see my use of this session with the icons that I mentioned before. Of course, if you're using it in a car, the trainer should not be driving, or an interpreter can read the information. Safety first, everybody, right? This plan also provides a nice and simple needs assessment. You're able to identify what participants know about these key statements, and you can add more or adjust the statements if needed. And I do apologize for this message that keeps popping up on me. So the next activity I wanted to address today is from the housing unit, and it is called Being a Good Neighbor. This one, like the other activity plans, provides information about key content and main messages for the trainer. The session asks participants to think about the following questions in a manner I like to call think, pair, share, where participants think about the question and pair and share their thoughts with someone else. So the questions that participants are asked to consider are: how did you get along with neighbors in places you lived before? Were you friendly with your neighbors? Were there certain things you were supposed to do or not do? So participants are then asked to pair up with someone sitting near them and share their thoughts about that. If you have someone near you, please consider these questions and share your thoughts. You can also write into the question box with your responses if you're not participating in this webinar with someone else. So the trainer would then divide participants into small groups. There are a number of critical incidents for groups to read and discuss. If you are working with a literary group, participants can read and discuss the incidents on their own. Interpreters can read the incidents and questions for consideration if you have a mixed group and enough participants, and of course if you're working with interpreters. If there are some literary participants, they can be divided among the groups. And of course the trainer can read the critical incidents aloud to the full group, and then small groups can discuss them. If this is the case, the activity plan recommends the trainer choosing the 2 or 3 critical incidents that are most relevant to the group discussion. This would be based on a formal or informal needs assessment with your participants or others like them. So you could identify, key things that have been a challenge or problematic, for others who have come before them who have similar backgrounds, and then, utilize the dogs that are living there, and the children are really afraid of the dogs, even though they do seem friendly. So now his children don't want to play outside because of their fear of the dogs. And then we have discussion questions for small group discussions. What could Nahid do so that everyone feels more comfortable? How would you handle this situation while keeping a good relationship with your neighbors? And then what is important for him to keep in mind so he can be a good neighbor and also ensure that his family is safe? The second critical incident included here is about Leisha and her family who moved to their home and are living near their cousins. Very nice situation for them. The cousins come over to Leisha's house and they cook and listen to music together. But then Laisha's landlord calls and says that things are getting too loud. After 9 o'clock, she needs to have her music off. So the questions to consider are that, what is the issue? What could Laisha and her family do to be more considerate of their neighbors? And then what do Laisha and her husband need to remember so they can be good neighbors but also be comfortable and happy in their new home? So this simple exercise can be used at someone's home or in a waiting room while waiting for an appointment. And then if someone in the car is literate, aside from the driver, this could be done in a car. And of course, the critical incidents could be read and discussed at someone's desk. The last activity I wanted to discuss during this webinar is from the employment unit and is called Finding a Job. As with the others, the introduction for the trainer provides key content and main messages for the session plan. As you can see, without this box in the way, the full activity plan takes about 35 minutes to run. It covers a number of important topics, thinking about different ways to find a job, common types of jobs, and interview preparation. These are all done very pictorially for this activity plan. Let's say I found out that my participants had a good handle on types of jobs or were very comfortable taking any job. I might start out with the ways to find a job, a think, pair, share activity like we did for the Being a Good Neighbor housing activity plan, where I had you think about the question and then turn to a neighbor or chat into the box and share your thoughts. And then after that activity, the think, pair, share, I would move into talking about interview tips. I would hang these two signs on the wall apart from each other. You're right versus you're not right. And then, of course, with the right and the not right, we're thinking about interview preparation. I would divide participants into small groups, or if it's a small group, I would keep them together. Then I would evenly distribute these interview preparation cards to the groups. Small groups would decide if their cards were right or not right and place the cards accordingly. So here you are, people placing the cards. Once placed, the trainer works with the group to ensure the cards are placed accordingly and in their accurate spot. And then as a group, the trainer with the group would move things around as needed to ensure that people had the right information. The trainer would then remind participants that having a job is very important for family self-sufficiency and debrief the session using the questions provided. This session can be used in a car, a waiting room, someone's home, or at a desk with the pictures spread out on the floor, or instead on a desk or the floor instead of being taped to the wall. In the car or the waiting room, participants could be asked to review the pictures and make determinations without spreading them out. The pictures could be discussed individually or in two groups, and the group that the participant thinks, the two groups would be the group that the participant thinks is right, and then the group that the participant deemed not right. Trainers can then also use translated versions of these materials, and there is a handout of interview reminders to send home with participants. It doesn't show the not right items. There are sample interview questions included for a variation of the session plan, depending on the needs of your participants and the time that you have. And then links to related critical incidents from the Core Center website, as well as others about the importance of networking and how to make use of it, are also provided. Lastly, I'd like to talk a little about learner assessment. There is more information in the user's guide, so I won't spend too much time on it. In the curriculum, it is found in two ways: through debrief questions at the end of each activity plan and through the orientation wrap-up unit, which has two separate activity plans. Learner assessments have three key uses I wanted to discuss today: assessing what participants learned during the orientation session, assessing how effectively the information was delivered, and then assessing how to adjust your next orientation program to improve upon it and how it can feed back into future orientation sessions so it can be used as a needs assessment. And as I mentioned, there's more on learner assessment and needs assessment included in the user's guide, so I won't, cover a whole lot about that. I am happy to answer more questions about it later. I will conduct a brief assessment of this session to give you a quick demonstration of a quick learner assessment that you could utilize with a more literate group of learners. I'll read a question aloud and give you some multiple choice options, and then I'll ask that you please type the letter of the best option into the question box. So the first question, who delivers orientation to refugees? Is it CO trainers, orientation trainers? Is it caseworkers or case managers? Or is it both? So you can go ahead and type A, B, or C into the questions box. I'm starting you out on some easy stuff here. Don't worry, I won't get too complicated. Here we go, yeah, so both. CO trainers, caseworkers, and case managers, and others deliver orientation to refugees. The second question, why is it important to have interactive orientation sessions? Is it because it's more fun? Option B, because people retain more information when they're actively involved in their own learning? Or is it option C, telling people what they need to know through lecture is equally as effective as an interactive orientation session? So you can go ahead and type A, B, or C into the question box. So yeah, yes, interactive orientation sessions are more fun. So yes, A is a pretty accurate answer, but the main answer is B, that because people retain more information when they're actively engaged in their own learning. My third question, why does making your way a reception and placement orientation curriculum include a lot of pictures? Is it A, because pictures look better? Well, they do, right? B, because pictures help those who are illiterate understand the information better? Or C, because pictures help most people understand the information better? So you can go ahead, type A, B, or C into your question box. So yes, absolutely, pictures do look better, and they absolutely do help those who are illiterate understand the information better, but most importantly, they help most people understand the information better. It helps providing pictures helps attract your visual learners, and also just to help give people a feel, if you're talking about a store or a bus, having a demonstration of what that looks like is just much more useful than just talking about it. All right, and my fourth question for you, my last question, on a scale of 1 being not very to 5 being very, how comfortable do you feel using curricula in your orientation delivery? Is it A, not very comfortable with using curricula in your orientation delivery, B, C, D through 5, you feel very comfortable using your curricula in your orientation delivery? So please take a minute to type your response into the chat box, A, B, C, D, or E. And thank you very much. I will now turn this back over to Sonia to discuss additional resources, and I'm happy to answer questions that you may have at the end.
Okay, hi everyone. So it seems like there were some issues with displaying Danny's last slide. Um, so I will pick it up from here and then turn it over to Danny in a minute for any concluding words on her part of the presentation. But a couple of things that, and thank you so much, Danny, for everything you shared in the previous slides and in your presentation. I want to answer just a couple of questions that came up, and some of them consistently from several people. And the biggest one is, and many of you asked this, kind of what do we do with our existing resources? And I want to preface this by saying that we, of course, know that many of you and many of your agencies have some excellent resources that are really working for you and for your clients. And that is great. The intent of this resource is not to replace good resources and effective resources you have in place. The intent of this resource is to be a standardized curriculum that people who do not have resources available can go to deliver the orientation and or enhance the orientation design and delivery. And for those of you who do have some excellent resources that you have developed over time, it can be an additional resource to go to or pull from if you would like to refresh your program a little bit or have some additional tools at your disposal. But as I said, the intent is not for this to displace or replace the other resources that you have in place if those are working for you. A related question that several of you posed is kind of how do we align this with what we have. So A, how do we align it with objectives? How do we align what we currently do and the resources, curricula, etc., program practices that we currently have with objectives and indicators and with this curriculum? So one exercise that all agencies will need to go through, and this is something that you will be discussing with your agency headquarters, and I know that many of you have been doing that already, is kind of taking a look and taking stock of what you have already and comparing that to the objectives and indicators document and the key objectives and indicators captured in that document, and making sure that they mirror each other and they're aligned, and that you are hitting all of the key objectives and indicators in both your CO delivery and in materials you have, etc. So just kind of reviewing what you have and making sure everything aligns, and then making any modifications necessary. For those of you who have existing resources, any modifications can be made to existing resources, and maybe a part of that is pulling something, some activities or other tools from CAL's R&P curriculum, and maybe it's something you do internally if you have the staff and the capacity and the ability to do that. But again, the intent of this is going to be a baseline that is available to everyone, and how it will be implemented in various agencies really depends on your starting point and what you're working with, and making this resource fit with what you have and what the particular needs of your clients are. The other question I wanted to touch upon is kind of goes back to the welcome book, and me mentioning that the welcome book, the new edition of the welcome book, is aligned with the objectives and indicators documents, both of them, the overseas and domestic. So yes, for those of you who have seen the book and have started to use the book for yourselves and for your clients, you will have noticed that it is a very different format than the old welcome book, which was strictly information. This one does have components of a workbook. So in terms of the distribution of the welcome book, nothing has changed. Each case is receiving the welcome book for the great majority of cases, unless there's some exceptional circumstance in which a case is not able to receive a copy of the welcome book before they board a plane to come to the U.S. The great majority of refugees receive a copy of the welcome book in the appropriate language. In this interim period, while we are rolling out the new edition and continuing to translate it in different languages, into different languages, there will be kind of a gap where some refugees will have received the Arabic translation of the new welcome book, and meanwhile we have not translated it into Farsi, for example, yet. So those refugees who are Farsi speakers will have received the old edition of the welcome book. But obviously the goal is, as we move through the next fiscal year and in the coming years, that we will continue to translate it and make it available in additional languages. So it is not intended for the welcome book to be distributed in large numbers to refugees domestically. The assumption is they will have received it overseas, and then for domestic distribution, we have sent sample copies of the languages that are currently available, including English and some of the others, to your headquarters, and you will be receiving sample copies from your national resettlement agencies. And when I hope that many of you are members of the Cal Refugee Discussion List. We have several ways of announcing new translations, publications, resources, etc. One is through the CO work group, so all of your headquarters receive notification whenever there's a new resource available, and they pass that on to all of you, and then also we announce it on the refugee discussion list. So you have received hopefully some languages. You will continue to receive them, and the same goes for the welcome video. As we translate it, we send it overseas, and we also send sample copies to resettlement agencies, and for both the book and the video it is 1 copy per agency. Also, a really important thing to mention is that all of these are available on our website. Everything we produce, the minute it's completed, we post it on the website, and it's there for you to use. Related to the welcome book as well, somebody asked, well, how are we supposed to use this? There are many activities in the new edition of the welcome book, and as I mentioned, everything is on the website. If any of those worksheets are useful to you in your CO delivery, please feel free to print them out and use them in your CO classes. Obviously, as we translate the welcome book, all of those are translated into many of the languages that your clients speak, so you're invited to use anything that is that can be of use to you in your context. And also, one thing that has that several people asked us about was the possibility of kind of collating all of the different workbook type things from the welcome book into one document. So we are hoping to work on that next year and to make that available on our website as one document, again, that you could print out and use as you choose, and to collate it for various languages as time goes by. Another question that I wanted to touch upon is the question of how somebody asked me, how are these topics chosen? Why is being a good neighbor in the curriculum as opposed to other things? So just to reiterate that all of these were based on the key objectives and indicators for orientation that the CO working group identified as we worked on these documents, and activity plans were developed for these key points identified by the group. And as Danny mentioned in her presentation, there's always an introductory lesson, which activity plan, which covers the basics. So the hope is that everyone can deliver those or some variation of that type of information that they may have in their own curriculum, resources, and programs. And then the other ones are choices and options depending on the context, the needs of your clients, and what you have available. Okay, so just to conclude with a few things regarding the next steps, and then we'll try to turn it over to Danny again to perhaps go over her last slide and answer some questions too. So what are we working on right now and what's coming down the pike? Obviously, we're in the midst of rolling out the reception and placement curriculum. It's already on our website and it can be accessed there. I will put up the website address on the next slide. And also to mention, we will post the PowerPoint on our website and also the recording of the PowerPoint of the webinar shortly, so you will have the slides available to you and will be able to listen to the webinar and refer others to the webinar. So the other part of the roll-up of the R&P curriculum is assembling the curriculum toolkits. For those of you who have had a chance to look at the curriculum, and you've also seen that in Danny's presentation, there are many pictures, case studies, different things that one needs for delivering the curriculum, or those of you who have your own curricula, you can use them as additional tools in your orientation. We will be assembling those separately as a toolkit, putting it up on the website, and then also next year working on putting together hard copies of those and translating those materials to send to agencies. And it will be one copy per agency. We are also in the process of printing the reception and placement curriculum. It is a huge binder with close to 800 pages because of all of the images and charts and various things in addition to activity plans. And we will be sending sample copies, so one copy per agency, to all of you. Again, most likely through your headquarters. The other component of the project is working on assessment tools. So our colleague Julie Sugarman, who specializes in that kind of work, is working on an assessment toolkit which all of your headquarters representatives, some of whom are on the call and who have been participating in meetings and reviewing all of the materials as they are developed, they have seen them. So there are three components to this. One is an assessment, which will be about 10 to 12 questions covering key concepts to be delivered to refugees after orientation, R&P orientation has been completed. Then a document with guidelines on how to use the assessment. And thirdly, kind of a frequently asked questions document, which will talk about things such as how do you administer this, what if you have one person or more, how do you look at the information, what can you do with the information you gather from assessments with clients, etc. So the plan is to roll out that assessment and the toolkit early next year, most likely in January. Our hope is by the end of January. It is currently the components of the toolkit are being the first two components are being reviewed by PRM, and then to move also conduct a webinar similar to this webinar, but focused on CO assessment in late January or early February, and we will announce that well ahead of time, and we hope to choose a date for that in the coming week or so. Then, as I mentioned during the introductory piece of the webinar, Cal will be turning our attention to working on training of trainers. Resources next year. The plan is supported by PRMs, like these resources are, and the goal is that for us to next year produce a comprehensive training of trainers manual to be used in conjunction with both overseas and domestic objectives and indicators to train staff who deliver orientation, and that will be accompanied by a training of trainers video. I will be sharing more information about that in the coming weeks, and the first step will be to get out a needs assessment to all of you and to overseas colleagues to help guide the development of those resources. And also, as I mentioned, all of the various supporting materials, the toolkits, translation of materials, etc. We will continue to work on those and keep you informed through your headquarters and the refugee discussion list. So finally, just a reminder, obviously putting up the website where all of the resources that we have been talking about are, and reminding you that there are many, many resources available to you for reviewing, using, printing, etc. On our website, including the various culture profiles and backgrounders. The most recent one is the one on Congolese refugees. Numerous videos are up on the website, not only the new welcome video and the various translations of it, but also what we are calling group-specific videos. Those have been distributed to you in the past year or so, and that is, for example, a video, the image you see on your screen with the title When I Came to America, that is a compilation of all of the different videos, refugees from Burma video, Iraqi refugees video, Bhutanese refugees, Darfur refugees, etc. And all of those are both on the website, and hopefully your agencies have received sample copies of those. If not, please let us know. And the one that is one of the recent videos that we put together, and with, working with PRM and with PRM support, is called Faces of Resettlement. It's a little bit different than the ones we have previously worked on, in that its focus is on, it is really intended for use with receiving communities and your partners in communities you work with. And it highlights stories of 5 refugees and also their relationships with community members and their contributions to their communities. It is less than 10 minutes long, and we have heard that people have been using it with volunteers for kind of raising awareness of refugees, educating communities about refugees, etc. And we are currently working on a toolkit to go with that video, which will have some discussion questions and some suggested uses, which we also plan to roll out next year. But again, not that anybody has any much extra time at your disposal to browse through the website, but when you do, we hope that you will visit the website and take advantage of the resources that are there for you. So, Danny?
All right, thank you, Sonia. Here we go, our questions. Our question slide. If you do have any questions, then please do write them into the question box, and Sonia and I will be addressing them. I have a few here to address now. One from Laura, a question about the needs of clients from various backgrounds and how you adjust for, those who might be uneducated or from refugee camps versus those from more educated backgrounds, or those who might be from a more urban environment. The curriculum has a broad array of session plans, so I would really encourage a needs assessment to be conducted and make determinations based on that. For example, some groups might really need a session on education versus employment and how to identify what the priorities for the individual or the family would be, while somebody else might really need a session on punctuality. So again, going back to my former remarks about needs assessment, it serves as a key issue, and we have strove to provide a really diverse array of activity plans and sessions, as well as different ways to vary the sessions based on the needs of your clients, of your refugees and participants. A question from Christina. Let's see. Oh, do the activity plans consider interpretation time? Yes, most activity plans do consider interpretation time, especially because most of the plans are very activity-oriented and consider a lot more in terms of thinking about a more interactive session. Oh, sorry about that. A question from Lear about UCO. We do offer a curriculum called I'm sorry, I want to make sure I don't get it confused, On Their Way. And it's an orientation curriculum that was developed for unaccompanied refugee minors. And it was developed initially with an overseas focus, but thinking about repetition and how different things become important at different points in time. That's a really good curriculum for programs to refer to. And while it was developed for URMs specifically, I would say at least 2/3 of it, if not more, is directly applicable to all youth. Question from Laura about CO, about orientation for individuals, and could orientation be administered in a more individual basis that would be more personal and be able to give more specific orientation to individual clients? You know, absolutely. But I will also say that if you're able, given your caseload and arrivals, a big benefit of having group orientation, even if it's just a few people, is that refugees are able to hear different perspectives. And as I've mentioned before, you know, people are in different places at different times during their resettlement process, and may be prepared to think about some things at one point in time that they might not even be aware of, and having a group orientation or something new to think about might be really helpful for some people. For most people, I would say. So, you know, it's definitely a decision to be made based on your time and resources, as well as priorities. And, you know, do you want to get, you know, the knowledge piece imparted, or do you want to also address some other things, or at least give people the opportunity to talk to others about, you know, how they're feeling, which also does provide the opportunity for a nice support group. Now, I fully understand that some of you don't really have big choices in terms of that, in terms of, you know, when people are arriving, and, you know, if you want to address things by language group or education capacity, or however you're dividing things up. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. So are there other questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Danny. And I will take a look now at the other questions to see what else we may be able to answer. Thank you for your patience as we glance at additional questions that come in. Okay, an interesting question. Somebody is asking, you know, what do you think? What are your experiences on mixed groups, particularly low literacy and highly literate group? And I think Danny addressed some of this when talking about the use of the curriculum and the flexibility of the curriculum. Obviously, having a mixed group presents numerous challenges to trainers. It can have benefits as well in terms of the curriculum, and in addition, additional component as well is the use of interpreters, which we touched upon. But in terms of, again, in terms of the curriculum, we really made every attempt to, in both the kind of the background pieces and instructions and the developing of the activity plans, to account for that, to give some variations and some guidelines in terms of how to adapt the different components and different activity plans depending on the background. I think that is all that I can see in terms of questions, and I will hand the microphone over to Barbara Day to answer one of the questions as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Barbara. there was a question, maybe more than one of you have this question, about what are PRM's expectations with regard to the delivery of COM, the documentation of COM, what was that? I don't know. I think our greatest expectation is that refugees learn something, that they understand what's being presented to them in CO, and that they are able to demonstrate their understanding. And you know, we've been working very closely with Cal, and Cal is professional at creating ways that can collect or document refugee understanding. Sonia mentioned an assessment coming up. This thinking is very consistent with the reception and placement indicators that we have included in the cooperative agreement in the last several years. For example, that the refugee by the end of the R&P period is connected to the larger community, to ongoing services, etc., and can navigate those systems. And so that's kind of what we're seeking too in terms of what a refugee gets from the CO that you will be delivering. And then regarding documentation, we will want to be seeing in case files, for example, or in your offices somewhere, documentation of refugee understanding, of refugee learning or demonstration of mastering these CO topics and concepts. We will be working very closely with the national agencies, the headquarters, on what we want to see at the local affiliate, what they want to see at the local affiliate in terms of this sort of documentation.
This is actually a great segue. Thank you so much, Barbara, into a couple of other questions that have come in. And one has to do with the assessment and the adaptation of the assessment to your current resources, to your current CO delivery, and also some assessments that people already have in their agencies locally and nationally perhaps as well. So as for the curriculum, the intent for the assessment is for this to be an assessment template. It is, and once you see it in January, you will see it is put together in a way to tackle all of the key topics in a certain order, but there will be instructions with the assessment directing you to some alternate questions, to some different types of questions you can use, etc. So again, if you feel that you have some tools already at your agency or through your national resettlement agencies that are working for you and that reflect the key objectives and indicators for R&P orientation, that is wonderful. There's no need for you to make change. As I mentioned, the only thing you would be doing is reviewing those, and if you determine that they align with the objectives and indicators, that is great. If not, if you don't have current tools, or you don't have tools that you feel are working for your program and your clients, you're welcome to use this template. But again, it is designed to be flexible, and we will outline in guidelines and frequently asked questions. What are some things you should not change if you want to get to a certain result, and what are some things that are flexible? So there'll be plenty of information about that. Another question, a really important question, is somebody asked, will Cal be adjusting this curriculum based on what you learn from agencies as you all begin to use the curriculum? And absolutely, I was actually going to mention that in closing and talking about the next steps, and that is that we are thinking about approximately a 6-month period or so for all of you to kind of live with this tool, and both for the assessment and for the curriculum, and then we will send out a survey to gather feedback on what's working, what's not working, and we have built into our plan of work for next year the tweaking of both the curriculum and the assessment. So as you begin to use both of these resources, please do think about your feedback, and if you can start collecting it or sharing it perhaps with us through email or through a national headquarters even before before you see the survey from Cal, but we would absolutely be asking those questions of you because that is the most important question. How is all of this working for you and your client? So we have built that into the process. And I'm scanning through some of the other questions, and I think that we have answered all of them. This is a really interesting one. Somebody's asking, when do we start with this new CO? And the question, the answer is now, whatever the timeline is that you agree upon with your headquarters and at your agency. There is no official timeline, and different pieces are coming to you and are being rolled out at different times. And what the CO work group kept talking about with PRM as well throughout this process is that this means very different things and very different levels of activity depending on individual agencies. It will be a change for some and not much of a change for others. And Barbara is also reminding me, obviously, there are requirements in the cooperative agreement related to CO objectives and indicators, and you will be discussing those and reviewing those and planning around those in terms of your documentation, again, at the agency level and with your national headquarters. Another question, and today we're not focusing at all on overseas orientation, but I do want to take on this question just to refer you to our website. Colleen asked what topics are covered overseas and how can we reinforce the message in our R&P orientation. So as I said, all of these pieces fall into different places along the CO continuum. So a good way to find out what overseas orientation addresses is to look at the overseas objectives and indicators document, and also the welcome book, because the welcome book really captures the content of overseas orientation and the key things that are addressed within every overseas CO program. So, and another resource on our website is if you go onto the website www.culturalorientation.net and you click on the overseas orientation button, you will see a map which has all of the different locations, different RSCs that deliver both the processing and deliver orientation in various locations, and you can click on that and you can see much more information about their caseloads, their program, how many hours, some of the key things they cover, etc. So I think that's a really, really good place to start. I think we answered the question about where to access the curriculum. And I hope that this webinar today answered to a large extent the question that one of you asked, and that is what is most important to teach refugee clients during initial CO, and that is the objectives and indicators document, and how to best impart this. And hopefully Danny has addressed that. I feel that she has in talking about some of the methods and approaches, individuals versus groups, and the importance of interactivity whenever that is feasible. Taking a final look at the questions. One question that we did not address directly, that's an important one, is when somebody takes a first look at this really extensive resource, people ask, oh my gosh, does this take 100 hours to deliver? And the answer is it can take as much time as you have available. If you only tackle the basic lessons, it is several hours. It is not very long. If you choose to use some of the optional lessons, it can be several days and broken down in any way that works for you. So it really, our hope is, and certainly Danny's intent in designing it, was to make it flexible in that way, that if you only have a limited amount of time, you can only cover the basics, and those do capture key objectives and indicators. If you have more time, you can do more on that. So there's another question that I think is a good question for Barbara, and on PRM have been discussing this extensively, and that is, has it been determined if the assessment has to be completed by 30 days or 90 days?
You know that the R&P period is a period of initial resettlement of 30 days, and there are a number of activities that must be completed at various points along the way during that 30 days. However, if certain activities cannot be completed, and cultural orientation is one of them, within that 30-day period, R&P can be extended or all the way up to 90 days. So we know that there are a variety of CO programs, just as in the R&P part of the program, where sometimes it's beyond your control to complete something within 7 days after arrival, or 10, or even 30 days after arrival. That needs to be noted in the case file very clearly as to why something can't be completed, and then there should be follow-up throughout the case file detailing what's being done until that activity is concluded. And the same would hold true for cultural orientation. Some of you will have programs that are compressed in time, and some of you have already established programs that take place over many weeks. So we would expect to see the same sort of flexibility in the demonstrated in the case files, that if you're not able to complete orientation within 30 days, you are able to complete it within the R&P period, which can be extended up to 90 days.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And with that, we are almost at 3:30. So I would like to thank Barbara and Danny for their participation and presentations and answering some of your really important questions. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We know that all of you have many things that you need to do, and that taking 90 minutes out of your day is not easy. So we really appreciate your participation and all of your questions. We will be reviewing these questions, and if there are any that we find that there are questions that are important questions to be answered, we will be following up with you after the webinar, and you are of course welcome to get in touch with us at any time with any questions you may have. And also, once you log out of the webinar, you will see a survey. So please take a minute to fill out that survey and to give us some feedback that will be really useful both in reflecting upon this webinar and in preparing for upcoming webinars and resource development. Thank you so very much, and we look forward to hopefully talking to many of you early next year when we conduct the assessment webinar.